Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to my channel. My name's Frank, and this is Starboost build 2.5. Okay, so basically I just uploaded Starboost build part 2. I'm kind of realizing actually how far I am in the printing process with this. I'm actually almost 95% done with the whole upper half, and I want to cover a couple things before I actually have a chance to make build part 3, because there's just a lot of little interesting things I learned while orienting the prints, and I really want to cover that with you guys before it's too late, before some of you might make a couple mistakes that I did. So this is just a real quick video. There's going to be a lot less editing, and it's going to be a lot more just me kind of explaining what I did to cut things apart and the orienting process. And I can do a good job in the real space showing you what I looked for when I was positioning things. So this is what I have so far, and I would say I'm probably, like I said, 95% done with the upper half of the body. All I have left currently is I'm printing the rest of the chest, because DO3D was kind enough to actually slice it into smaller pieces, which this is one side that's almost done, and then on the SD card loaded I have the other side. So literally these last two parts, and I'll be able to assemble the chest, but we'll kind of cover that. I'm going to kind of start from the smaller parts and work our way up, and then we're going to talk about what all that is. So what do we got going on here? This is the whole arm section, most of the chest, the abs, and the lower back. So what I wanted to do is, since Starboost didn't come with any hands, DO3D released the Mark II through Mark 40 something high poly free hands. Now these aren't it. These are actually their Generation 1 hinged hand set, and you put a little pin through there and these close, because I wasn't a fan of the, I wanted to test these out because I just wanted to be able to, you know, slide my hand in there and close them all up all nice, and it was a great concept. However, since I don't scale anything and I print off raw parts, my hand just fits. Like, this couldn't fit any better, and I can just barely close that around my palm. However, that leaves me with no room for electronics, for my morph suit, for nothing. So this is the palm at 100%, and I'm gonna go back and probably print this out at maybe 110%, and that should give me just enough room. But I really love the details that are in this hand. You can see how nice they came out, and it would just be beautiful painted. And then I'm gonna use the fingers from the free high poly hand, which I'll link both of these down below. You can buy this, use the hinged fingers, or you can just print the whole free hand if you want. That's totally fine. And I'm doing a little bit of combination of the both because the way I plan to construct the arm. Maybe I'll make a little pen holder like I have on my desk, and I'll give these away or something. So they released the hand topper when they released the lower section, the leg area, and this is actually a pretty simple design. It just sits kind of right about here. I think this is the right side. Yeah, it sits something like that on the forearm. However, while building this, I noticed something, and I got to message DO3D about this. They missed some hexagons on the forearm. This section right here is supposed to be patterned just like this, and also this little area down here is also supposed to have hexagons. So this is supposed to flow as one piece, and I want to see, I don't want to reprint the forearm, and if you guys have already done that, that would kind of suck. So I want to see if they can print a very thin, if they can design a very thin polygon cover that we can print out and just drop and glue onto here. I think that would be great. It would save everybody from having to reprint all these parts. So I'll get in touch with them about that and see if they can do it, because it would just literally need to be a plate that they need to cut out, add the texture, and we can glue on. And really, like parts like this, the hexagon pattern's already raised, you'd be none the wiser, and it would help the hand topper flow a lot better. I printed the hand topper standing straight up. I think when I dropped it into the build plate, it was oriented just a little bit weird, but I just straightened it right up, and actually one of the hexagons popped off. The same one on both hand toppers, because it's two polygons, kind of two meshes collided with each other, they actually it just popped off. But I thought it was pretty funny that it came off so nicely, and I can just glue that back on. This one wanted to come off too, because just this curve that the hand topper takes, you can actually see some gaps in there, and it came right off. So if that happens, just be ready. That's probably going to happen to you too. I grabbed one of my CR10 beds because I wanted to show you guys how I actually oriented this, and you can see where all my supports were, which I'm going to clean up with a Dremel. I really haven't gone through and post-processed like the supports or anything, but I actually printed it angled mostly just like this. I had kind of just positioned it standing straight up. I didn't really use any supports on the inside. I had some bad stringing, and I made sure to mark which one was left and right. Aside from the stringing, I didn't have too many issues. There were some weird supports, but this was fairly simple to orient. I know I'm going through a lot, guys. I just want to make sure I give you guys the best possible advantage when you start orienting and printing this stuff. So we'll actually keep my ender bed there. And this should fit on an ender if you really wanted it to, the forearm. It should come out just fine. Just, you know, when you're printing tall stuff, I always try to orient it in the X-axis more than the Y. This way the bed has to move less. But this is a little bit more of a rounder object, so it really wouldn't matter which way you put it. I'm being very conscious of how I'm orienting everything to use as little supports as possible on the hexagons, because getting supports out of this just isn't fun, and it would really ruin the look if you have to pull a bunch of supports out like I had to do on the abs. So I had to make a decision on the forearm, or on the arms itself. I printed the bicep. This actually isn't monoprice PLA. I accidentally printed this in Sunlu PLA Plus. I got my grays mixed up, so you can see it's just a little bit darker. I printed this just fine. Again, you can see where my supports were, and this is a pretty straightforward print. It fits just fine on an Ender 3 bed, and you can orient this any way you want. This was a little bit confusing to print. I think I actually ended up kind of tilting it backwards, something like that. This is the inner forearm, or the inner elbow, and this sits something like this inside the inner elbow and the outer elbow, and then this sits in the bicep. Now there's gonna be, I'm gonna do a whole video kind of showing you guys my plans for this, but I didn't print this in flexible material because I'm gonna try a different method of cutting this apart and making a whole special hinge system for the entire arm. So this is actually just printed in PLA, and it actually doesn't fit up my arm all the way. Even at the 100%, it gets kind of caught halfway up my forearm right there, and TPU might make it, but since I'm gonna cut this into little sections and pieces, I don't have to worry about that. Everything else fits with absolute ease at 100%. My hand has plenty of room to go through there, and all of these printed pretty nicely so far. The shoulder piece gave me a little bit of anxiety. It was the first part I printed where I had to use a lot of supports on the hexagons on the bottom. I spent way too much time trying to orient this thing, and basically what I did is I looked at it like this, standing up. I tried laying it down, I tried tilting it forward, I tried putting it outside, and ultimately you can see where my supports were, that I went with standing it straight up like this, tilting it just as far back as I could to limit the amount of supports without generating supports inside, and I think I oriented it something like that. I wasn't happy about it, but they actually ended up coming out pretty good. I'm gonna need to go in there with a hot knife soldering iron, and I can actually clean up a lot of those lines, and that'll be a tutorial for a little bit later, but this thing came out absolutely beautiful. Now, you could print this obviously on a CR10S. I think you could just barely manage to fit this on an Ender 3, but it's going to be really maxing out in Ender's capabilities, and if you might start to get some layer lines and wobbling near the top, and it could kind of ruin the whole thing. I'm doing my best to not have to cut and slice through any of the hexagons, because refusing this and lining this up is just not going to be fun, and it's not something I want any of you guys to have to do. Everything I've printed so far, even on my Max, could be rearranged and fit on a CR10S that has about 300 by 300 by 400. So even if you don't have something like a Max or an S4 or S5, you can still fit most of these parts on just your pretty standard everyday beds. The hip pods pretty much printed exactly the same way as the shoulders. I stood them up just like this, and they fit actually pretty nicely on an Ender, even in the X-axis, you know, just fine. You could orient them like this if you wanted, and you can actually see where my supports were. I think I tilted this back just a little bit. I think I actually laid it so this was touching the bottom, and that let me print the hexagons without any supports at all. And I think I just needed a little bit of a support in there, and it really didn't use too much material at all. Now, this might be the first piece you would have to cut that wouldn't fit on a CR10S. It's just barely too big, and you might be able to get real creative with it, but this isn't a direction that I would actually recommend printing something this large. But there's no hexagons on this at all, so making a seam weld, and you can actually see where I put my Z seam, which was kind of an odd spot for it, honestly. This was printed on my Max like this, and let's just imagine this is a much bigger bed than it really is, and I actually had a layer shift while this was going, and I still can't figure out why, but I believe I lifted it up just a little bit because there's a lot of stair steps in here. You're gonna need some supports here. I did my best to mitigate it, but I actually believe I stood it up something like that, and then it just printed supports all along the bottom, and then you can actually see where my layer shift was, where I re-welded it, and you guys can actually go watch that video of me fixing this. And it's gonna need a little bit of wood filler, but it's nice and strong, and I trust it, and it's the whole back ab section, and honestly, you're not really gonna see that once it's painted. But if you needed to orient this on a CR10S or an Ender 3, my recommendation would either be to cut it right down the middle, or what you could do is you could cut it into 3 parts and maybe make a cut right down here on both sides. So you have this is all one piece, and then this is one section and one section. This way when you seam weld it, it really won't be as noticeable, instead of having to seam weld this entire lip. And I actually thought this was a support. This is part of the model itself, and I came close to actually breaking that off. These abs gave me anxiety. I spent probably, no lie, 2 hours orienting this, positioning this, angling it, adding support, removing support, flipping it, slicing it. This kicked my ass. You can still see I have a lot of cleaning up to do where those supports are. Inside there came out pretty good, and inside there came out pretty good. But the upper abs, the very top section, this came out kind of like dookie. So I'm gonna need to clean up a lot in there. But again, you're really not gonna see it. The hexagons I care about, they came out just fine. So I'm gonna maybe pick my battles, and we'll see how much we can clean this up. But ultimately, my orientation, it ended up looking something like this, standing as straight up as possible. And I had to bite the bullet on supports here, the same way I did on the shoulders. I just had to stand it up, because if you try to print this like this, flat, the hexagons are gonna look terrible. You need to print them standing up. There's gonna be top layer issues, there's gonna be stepping. It's just not gonna be a good quality print. And printing it like this actually took longer because of all the weird supports I needed underneath it to support all these crazy shapes. There's just so many steps in this thing. They could have probably modeled this a little bit better, but you know what, for a free STL file, I can't complain like that. You're just gonna have to use some supports for this one. I would not cut this thing. Again, you're gonna see so many of the hexagons, and the seam lines are gonna be a nightmare. We already talked about the helmet in the other video, so you can go and look at the orientation for that and how I cut and slice things, and you can use that video to learn how to use Mesh Mixer a little bit more intuitively to make better plane cuts than Slicer. I've been trying to get more involved with Mesh Mixer to show you guys how to use it, because it has a lot cooler features than Slicer. Slicer is just more of a brute force butcher's block. It makes XYZ plane cuts, and that's it. But if you have to start getting a little more creative, maybe you could cut in here, do a really fancy plane cut, mess around with it, and we'll see where it gets you. I have a CR10 Max, and I could have printed the chest in one giant whole piece. I either had to orient it to where the front of the chest with the hexagons were facing forward, like so, and then they weren't going to be damaged by the supports, because if there's one section of this build I want to look good, it's the chest. Or I had to flip it down and stand it up at this really weird angle that I just didn't want to deal with. It was either a buttload of supports in a bad spot, or literally double the amount of support material I needed to print this to make it look nice. I think it came out to, it was either a 7-day print or maybe a 3-day print, and then all of these hexagons would just look like garbage. So I messaged DO3D for myself, and for the fact that cutting this up by ourselves was going to be a nightmare. So I asked them if they could just break this apart into better polygons, and what they did is they cut just the hexagon part out. So this is one plate. The vents are their own prints. This collar part is its own print, and you can see where they're all together currently. There's the armholes that actually kind of sit right back here. They actually line up right in there, but they don't fit together nicely until the other parts are done. That's on my printer right now, so I can't really tape these into sections. And that's it. So it prints in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 parts, and you can fit all of these on a CR10S. You can actually fit most of these on an Ender 3. You can actually fit this just fine on an Ender. I printed this one, actually, yeah, I printed this one standing up on my CR10S just like that, and it made a really funny support right through the center. But this would fit on an Ender 3 just fine. The collar piece and the vents were printed on my Ender 3, and they're pretty easy to do. I don't want to take them apart, but I printed the collar piece standing up like this. Just this little flat, the little smooth collar part. I printed it just standing up like that. The vents were easy to do, and you wouldn't be able to print the whole center chest in one shot on an Ender 3. It would be just out of limits. You could probably stand it up like that, but you're getting a little risky. I ended up printing it on my Max, but you could do it on a CR10S no problem. Just you'd have to do it sideways, and I printed it something standing up like this, and it was just absolutely perfect. Now, you could do my little trick in Slicer where you can rebuild the parts by taking out the auto orient and you can actually rebuild this just like this and then print this as one part if you really wanted to. I probably should have done that. The fitment would have been a little bit better, but I'm happy with how this looks right now. And we're almost done with this section. Now this didn't fit on my CR10S, but what you could do is make a nice little plane cut somewhere right here to avoid the vent and the hexagons, and then this whole side would fit on the 10S. This Jetpack is effing awesome. I feel like Buzz Lightyear when I'm wearing it. It is just cool. It looks awesome. My tape is starting to fail. And I actually cut this up just a little bit more than DO3D did. Again, when they released it, I messaged them and asked, hey, this thing's a little big. Cutting it's gonna be a nightmare. Can you guys break this into smaller polygons? Now I'm gonna take this apart and I'm not gonna put it back together for the video. So just, you know, appreciate it. It fits beautifully and it all locks together pretty nicely, but I wanna show you the other cuts I made. Okay, so it's broken down right now, and what DO3D did is they made it into 3 sections. The core section, the left booster, and the right booster, or left booster, right booster. And they added these little tab lines, so what you can do is once you print it, if you print it in all just 3 pieces, these actually slide and kind of lock together. I can't do it right now. Let's see if I can lift it up a little. But they actually go and then lock together. See, just like that. And this way when you weld them, they have, there we go, they have a little bit more strength and they line up pretty nicely. So they went and made these cuts. So if you had something like a Max, you could print this, because the way this is built is I actually made 2 more plane cuts. So this was the core piece, and this part is the neck, and it sits just like that and on both sides. And it was, again, just a little bit too big. It was a very weird orientation for my Max. I didn't want the top of this to be all, you know, rigid. The way I oriented this left some, you know, lines that I'm gonna have to clean up, but this is gonna be hidden by the neck and the head. I wanted the top of this, at least the front of this, to look good. So I actually sliced it off exactly where the booster comes out. Now, if you look at the files, you'll see exactly what I mean. You can see there's a step here, and that's where I made my plane cut, and this was a natural cut left in the model from when they removed these boosters. Because when you actually go and put these on now, the boosters line up with the side pieces just like that, and everything kind of locks together perfectly. So I went and just lopped those off at this kind of natural line that was there, and then I printed this standing straight up on my Max. It would fit on a 10S just fine. There would be no absolute issue with this, and again, I oriented it kind of standing up like this to save the hexagons from any damage, and it made a pretty beefy support, and you can see just how clean this popped up. And it sat like this, and it was something like that, and it came up just perfectly. And I just printed this standing straight up, and it really did help and save a lot of the detail and quality in this print. And then now all I have to do is go and fuse on these 2 little booster ends, and then this will be one piece. And again, I wasn't really happy with this booster because I had to stand it up, but by standing it up on my 10S, it was making a buttload of supports in there, and I didn't like it. It was, again, gonna take too long. It was using almost as much support that it was material for the print. So I got, again, one of the mesh mixer, and I was very, very careful. I made a very nice plane cut all the way around the end of the booster, and I thought I got it perfect, but right there I hit some hexagons, so I'll have to clean that up. What I might do is just smooth them out so this whole top part doesn't have them. But what I did is I cut it, and now I'm left with these 2 pieces, and you can see them right there. I might just lop those off, honestly. And then it'll glue together just like that, or fuse together. And this way I was able to print this flat down, and then I was able to print this standing straight up just like that with no support requirement at all inside. And it literally came out just like that, popped off, and then this will be easy to smooth and sand down with the electric sander, and I'm not worried about that, and it saved me a lot of time. Printing this pissed me off so bad because the amount of support I needed, this just is a weird shape. Standing it up, laying it, I wanted these hexagons to look good, so I had to lay it flat, and it gave me the weirdest support I've ever seen because I used tree supports inside of it to mitigate waste, and I still actually had a good amount of it. This weighs almost as much as this, and it was my biggest waste of the print so far, and I don't want to talk about how hard it was to get that out, but build it however you want. That's how I printed it. I'm pretty sure I printed this on my Enders. something like that, and it's just oriented flat, and the detail came out pretty nice. Yeah, I think it was sideways like that, and it worked out very fine. As I'm recording this, I actually might upload some of these cuts for you guys and put them in like a Google Drive. This way we can share, because since it's a free file, there's no copyright or law restrictions here for, you know, I can share these cuts with you with no problem, because all of you can get the files for free. This right here is my only failed print so far. Aside from the layer shift on the abs, this got knocked off during a live stream. It ran out of filament, and I messed up doing the filament swap, and the print just failed. My printer overheated, and that was it. But because it was through those hexagons, I refuse to weld those together. So this was it. I ended up just printing the whole hip pod as one solid piece because it just looks better. So this is a total wash, but I'm gonna use it and melt it and use parts of this as a filler material to actually go ahead and fill in, you know, the welds and the backpack. So it's not total waste. This is total waste. These are all the support materials that I used so far. And if you're wondering, I already did the math for you guys. Everything you've seen here, all of these parts, basically the entire top part of Starboost, calculating in what it's gonna be to finish that, is about 3.5 to almost 4 kilograms of PLA. That's it. I was able to do almost the entire upper half of the suit with about 4 rolls. This brings me to 5 rolls, the amount of support material. I have a little scale, and this thing has been absolutely awesome for calculating in and factoring in weights and stuff, because then all I can do is I can go and drop my piece on and find out exactly how much it weighs before and after I take the support material off. So I weighed everything when I took it off the printer, and I've been keeping track of that. And then I cut everything off, and now I can see just how much support material was wasted on that piece alone. And then I'm also gonna save all the support material for the whole print to see how many rolls did it actually take, because weighing the suit when it's done doesn't give you a good estimate. You need to know what did you sacrifice in the process. And about a roll of filament so far to get the whole upper half, I'm pretty happy with that. I know that was a lot. You guys are probably gonna have to watch this a couple times to really understand what I did, and I know I was talking fast. I just wanted to get a lot of this out there because a lot of people have been asking me questions about the orientation. So that's pretty much what I did so far. Update video 3 will be coming out later this week, and I'll go a lot more into detail with some settings and specific orientation and cuts. And if you guys have any questions, please drop them, comment, message me on Instagram, do whatever you need to. And I'll either try to answer them directly or make sure I cover them in the next video for you guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please, that'd be great. Please stay tuned for more. I have a lot more coming, and I'm about to start looking over the leg files as well. I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.